Hey guys, Dr. Michael Young here. Hope everything is going well in your world and you're enjoying this last few days of our spring break. I happen to be today recording from a different location. I've left Fraser's Bottom and I'm recording today in a house in Boone, North Carolina, home of Appalachian State University, where I used to teach. Still have some friends and connections down here, and so I'm down here for a week. Um, we're moving right ahead. This is our 10th topic. Yeah. So we're talking about conflict. And this is something that all of us have experience with. Conflict occurs when a perceived gap exists between what is desired and what is experienced. All of us have had situations like that where we've been involved with conflict. And what we're going to talk about today is that conflict can be good. Yeah. We normally think of conflict as something that's bad, something we try to avoid at all costs, but actually that's not the best strategy. You should, in fact, try to cultivate a little bit of conflict in certain situations. So we're going to talk about that in our next slide. So if conflict is good, we call it functional conflict. It has a function. If conflict is bad, it's dysfunctional conflict. It's not always easy to tell the difference between these two. Functional conflict is constructive, cooperative, it's consultative, focuses on issues rather than personalities. It focuses on things that can be corrected or improved rather than simply two parties trying to hurt each other. There's mutual respect and there's give and take. On the other hand, dysfunctional conflict, that type of conflict that's bad, it makes things worse. It lowers the performance of an organization. And so dysfunctional conflict in organizations leads to absenteeism, turnover, possible unionization, or litigation. I was thinking about an example to talk about how conflict can be functional and how conflict can be dysfunctional, and why some conflict is good. And so I was trying to think of a relevant and timely example, and I saw something the other day. I saw Vladimir Putin. He was talking to his cabinet, and he was talking to his spy chief at the time. And you may have seen this video too. I forget which station it was on. But anyway, he was just dressing this guy down. Now, they say that a problem whenever you have a totalitarian dictator like Vladimir Putin, that there's no conflict, that it looks as though on the surface that everything is going well, but really people are resentful and scared, and so this causes the dictator to make bad decisions. On the other hand, democracy we know is messy. We see a lot of conflict every day. And to be honest, sometimes some of the conflict, the political partisan bickering, is dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional whenever people start calling each other names and so forth. But that still doesn't mean that we should abandon the system, because much of the conflict, whether we realize it or not, may actually be functional conflict. And so by hashing these things out and struggling to make decisions that brings everybody on board, we make better, sounder decisions than if there was no conflict and all the decisions were made by a dictator. So, yeah, don't always try to avoid conflict, is the moral of that story. You may have heard, or at least I've heard, and you may have heard too, that whenever you have a relationship between two people in a romantic type relationship, husband and wife, or whatever, it's not good if they don't fight. Yeah, we think of conflict between partners as being dysfunctional, but actually, some conflict is necessary in just about every healthy relationship. So they say that couples that never fight are actually more likely to end up splitting up in the long term than those that do have fights every now. What are some of the common causes of conflict in organizations? Big one is personality difference. Another one is irritating workplace behavior. Another is unmet needs. Another is, we talked about justice, perceived injustice. When roles are not clear, that's more likely to lead to conflict. Whenever people have competing responsibilities, whenever there's a lot of change or management or communication, differences in work methods, all of these things are common causes of conflict within organizations. Conflict can be in danger of escalating to the point, other things equal, we would expect extreme conflict more likely to be dysfunctional. So whenever you see conflict escalating, then that may be a sign that we need to somehow figure out a way to calm things down. Some warning signs of conflict escalation are things like change of tactics, growing numbers of issues, moving from specific to general, and number of parties grows or goals change. Avoiding conflict is not the best course of behavior. De-escalating conflict when it becomes too powerful and becomes dysfunctional is, of course, a good strategy, but trying to avoid conflict is not necessarily the best path because it causes resentment. It causes people not to be able to air their grievances. People might bottle up this resentment that they have, this anger, these bad feelings, and then they might burst out later. Instead of avoiding conflict, studies suggest that it's better to try to manage the conflict. In fact, in some situations, we might actually try to have conflict, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But first off, let's talk about a specific type of conflict. This is something that's become very popular in research today as work-life conflict. Whenever you have a lot of stress in your home, in your personal relationships, this will undoubtedly spill over into your work life. Likewise, if you have a lot of conflict in your work relationships, that's likely to spill over into your home life. And it's important not to allow those two things to collide to the point that it can be an exponential effect. I like to say we only have so much emotional energy. We think about trying to achieve certain things, and when we try to achieve something, we have to expend our emotional energy. We only have so much of it. So if we are not careful, we can blow that energy on things that are trivial, and you can squander your emotional energy on dysfunctional conflict, and so that causes you to make less progress both in your life and your family. So the moral of that story is that it's important to have work-life balance, and so this takes work from both. You need to work on it both in your family and in your organization, and we see that the importance of work-life family balance tends to vary across generations. What is program conflict? Well, rather than trying to avoid conflict, we might try to encourage constructive conflict. Again, we don't want to have a team of people that are just yes men or yes women. I guess we would call it yes people. But let me stick with the traditional yes men because it's easier to say. We don't want to have a group made up of yes men. We don't want to have a group that everyone agrees, because that can lead to groupthink, in which a group makes bad decisions because there's a lack of conflict. What we would rather have is a group that agrees to disagree and then pushes the boundaries of what the group is capable of by imagining all the different scenarios respectfully and then hashing it out and arguing to see who has the better arguments. A couple of popular ways of doing this managed conflict. You might have heard something called the devil's advocate. And you and your friend, let's suppose you and your friend or friends are trying to come up with an idea, and your friend, you're thinking about doing something, starting a new job, or moving to another part of the country, or marrying an old boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever. And your friend says, let me play the devil's advocate. Now that means I'm going to respectfully disagree with you and try to say all the bad things that might possibly happen. You know, a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like that, but you know, whenever people are playing the devil's advocate, if they do it constructively and they do it correctly, it's a great help because it makes you see things in a different position. You know, we all have a tendency to get wedded to our ideas and think that we're right and other people are wrong, and so it's a good friend and a good service to us sometimes when people point out places where we might be mistaken. Another one is called the dialectical method. You might have heard of this. The dialectical method dates back to Socrates. Socrates was supposedly the first of the great Greek philosophers. Well, the one that sets the stage for much of Western civilization. There were other philosophers before Socrates, but he's the one that started the train of thought, but of dialectical discussions. And so Socrates' method was called the dialectical method, and basically it's just questioning. Well, okay, then what about this? And then the solution to that. Okay, then what about this? And it's not really coming up with solutions, but like this says here, it's fostering a structured debate so that you can bring out opposing viewpoints. So the dialectical method is kind of like brainstorming, but with the idea that you're deliberately going to try to come into conflict and challenge each other's suppositions, assumptions, which can lead to hopefully constructive conflict. Okay, next thing I'm going to show here is a little graph. This is figure 10.5. This is kind of cool. This is a little graph that shows different conflict handling styles. We have 5 different styles here. This is what we call a typology. And what we have over here on the left is concern for others, going from low to high. Down here on what we call the horizontal axis, this is the vertical axis, of course. But down here on the horizontal axis, we have concern for self. Here on the vertical axis, we have concern for others. And then when we do that, we have 4 different categories here. And then we have one in the middle that's called compromising, that's kind of combining a little bit of all of these. So if you have very high concern for yourself, but very little concern for others, your common conflict handling style is going to be dominating. You're simply going to try to dominate others. If you have, on the other hand, very low concern for yourself, but very low concern for others, you're simply going to try to avoid conflict. Now, if you have very low concern for yourself, but high concern for others, you're going to be very obliging, kind of deferential, letting other people have their way. Now, if you are high on both of these, we have one called integrating, right? And then a combination of all of these together in the middle here is called compromising. Okay? So something that's become really popular lately is this idea of alternative dispute resolution. I've been involved with some types of alternative dispute resolution. Alternative dispute resolution is, let's suppose you have a conflict with somebody else in the organization, And this is escalating. And rather than just try to hash it out into a knockdown, drag out fight, or maybe going to a court, let's suppose you could go to a legal type of dispute resolution, which is costly and has some other bad ramifications. You might go for an alternative dispute resolution. In fact, if I recall correctly, somebody told me that West Virginia is trying to make a mid-level court between the first level court and the final level court. But in North Carolina, where I was living before, they had something called an ombudsman or a dispute resolution. You go to something, it's not a court, you go to a lawyer that's in this dispute resolution, and they try to come up with this alternative dispute resolution rather than going through legal proceedings. And the good things about ADR are these things: it's faster, cheaper. You don't have to spill all of your dirty laundry in front of judge or jury or whatever, or colleagues. Potential for a win-win resolution. And these are the different types of ADR: facilitation, conciliation, peer review, ombudsman. Ombudsman is a person who supposedly is supposed to be a neutral party. They're just trying to come up with a solution that benefits two other parties that are opposed to each other in a conflict. Mediation, arbitration, these are all types of ADR. Next thing we're talking about is negotiation. And there are complete courses on negotiation. In our organizational behavior 320 course, the A320, we're just going to touch on some of this. So we're talking about this give and take process. Negotiation is something, again, total books have been written on it. You've got integrative versus distributive. In other words, you can have a win-lose type of negotiation, or you can have a win-win type of negotiation. Your negotiation style, while negotiation is kind of like a game of poker, kind of like acting, and you're kind of on a stage, at the same time, it's not really. Just as like I tell new teachers that are trying to become starting out as teachers, you really need to know your own style whenever you start teaching. You need to know who you are and what you expect. Thinking about the other person's outcome, your reputation, standards of justice, and these are going to vary from person to person. So you need to think about yourself before you choose a negotiation style. And you need to let these negotiation styles grow over time, just like lots of things. I've been a professor for many years now, and my approach is different from some other people's. I like to think it's more personalized to my situation, my personality, and so forth. And it's evolved, it changes, and every course is different that I teach. It's kind of a negotiation process in some ways. But anyway, and emotions. Emotions are our best friend and our worst enemy at the same time. Can be, right? There's a famous saying by, I believe it's Mark Twain. Now let me think this through. Maybe you can help me out here. Mark Twain is said to have said something like, "Any dumbass can get mad." Getting mad is the easiest thing in the world, right? You can get mad about anything, anytime. But to get mad for the right reasons, in the right degree, at the right time, that's hard. That takes a lot of effort. You can't avoid your emotions. You need to channel your emotions. You need to use your emotions and let them power you, again, for the right reasons, to the right degree, and at the right time, and not allow people to manipulate you by pushing your button, so to speak. I think that personally, it seems as though that negotiations and civility is kind of broken down over the past, say, 10 years. And I'm thinking about political discourse in particular. I think a lot of it has become dysfunctional. Like, for example, let's suppose we have two politicians that are debating. Well, you expect there to be some conflict, right? Some differences of opinions. But it's helpful if those differences of opinions focus on the issues, which they don't do often, avoid personal attacks, which they don't do very often. For example, let's suppose you and I disagree on something, and I could say something like, you know, your idea, I don't think it will work because of this and this and this and this. What do you have to say about that? That's constructive. On the other hand, I could say, you're a dumbass, right? What can you say? If somebody resorts to name calling, which they often do, that ratchets up escalates the conflict. If you get into name calling, well, there's nothing you can say about that except another name call. If somebody says your idea is incorrect or could be improved because of this, well, yeah, sure, that's okay. That's constructive. If they say you're ugly, what can you say? That's definitely not constructive. It's not functional. It's dysfunctional. So, right. Uh, so that's going to finish it up. Thanks for watching this. I hope it was useful. Enjoy the last few days of your spring break. And as always, stay awesome.